So I think a lot of what I have to say actually has already been said earlier today. A lot of this actually happened during the discussion after the end of the early afternoon session. And what Chris had to say resonates very strongly with what I have to say. And a lot of what we've heard is a lot of what we have been thinking about. So this is really nice to see. Let me share my screen. I have just one slide for you. I'm a part of MIT's physics education group, and we are a group of academic staff in the department who work on education related things. And we have had a few meetings where we've come together to talk about sort of what our response is going to be to ChatGPT and similar large language models for our response for the fall teaching. That's what's the most pressing need for us right now. And so I'm going to I'm here as a representative of this group, and I'm going to sort of try to recap our discussion that we've had and where we are right now. But let me say that we are very much in the listening phase right now. We are hoping to get as much information, and the landscape is changing so quickly that we are still not completely sure exactly how we're going to respond in the fall. But a lot of actually what Chris had to say resonates very strongly with where we are right now. So let me also mention that I'm also part of the Digital Learning Lab, which Chris is also sort of the head of in some sense. And so I've also been talking to colleagues from other departments who are interested in digital learning and creation of online materials about these topics as well. All right, so I have three sort of short topics that I'd like to tell you about, and then I have a Google link for you to give us feedback so we can improve our thinking for the fall. All right, so the first part that I want to talk about is sort of a framework for deciding to use any new technology in the classroom, and then specifically that applied to ChatGPT. So when deciding to use a new tool in your classroom, something you should consider is the cognitive load of learning to use that tool for the students and for the instructor as well. And sort of, is the cognitive load worth the benefits that you're going to get from that tool? Another piece of this is the privacy concerns, which we've heard mentioned earlier. As Chris said, we are not going to ask our students to use ChatGPT for exactly the reasons of privacy, but we know that most of them are using it anyway, so we want to sort of acknowledge that, but we're not going to explicitly ask them to use it. Then there's also sort of the bigger picture concerns, one of which we've heard a lot about sort of the data usage or the energy usage, but sort of from the environmental perspective, we should also be thinking about this, right? If this is a tool that they could easily do something with a Google search, that they're now using ChatGPT, are they using an order of magnitude more energy? Is this sort of an environmental concern that we should think about? Versus sort of the other side of this, this bigger picture, this is going to be a tool that they are going to need to use in their future, right? I think this is something we've talked about a lot today. We know that this is sort of going to change the landscape of what it is to do work in the future. And so this is a tool that we need to help students learn how to use effectively. Although I would say they probably already know how to use it more effectively than we do as instructors. Okay, so the second thing I wanted to mention is how instructors can use ChatGPT. So we, as a group, came together and sort of discussed, and we have, all across the spectrum of how we're already using it, although not as complicated as any of the things that we've seen earlier today, but, writing code for better simulations, writing first drafts of reference letters, generating other similar problems, or potential wrong answer choices for multiple choice problems, that kind of stuff. And we actually have a former colleague, so she's not in the physics department anymore, but she used to be here, who is working on training AI for automated grading. So, sort of the full spectrum of what instructors could potentially be using this for. And I'm curious to hear if there's more, but I think the main focus that I'd really like feedback on is this last piece, which is what should we do this semester? How can we help students better learn to use a tool like ChatGPT, but still also achieve our other learning goals for the course? So this is where, we know a lot of the students are already using ChatGPT, and we don't want to tell them that they can't use it. And in fact, we want to help them get better at it if that's what they're choosing to do. And part of this is sort of, as Chris mentioned, the metacognition piece, right? If they are going to use it to try to start their problem sets, they're going to have a harder time learning that content. So we need to be explicit, and we will actually talk with them in the classroom about why they should start their problem sets by themselves, and then maybe where they should try to use ChatGPT when they get stuck, right? And to really think about that process of learning. As we have all been saying, critical thinking skills are extremely important in sort of, and increasingly important in this age of something like ChatGPT. And I think we can really emphasize that in class. This is one of the main learning goals of our course, is the critical thinking skills. We're teaching introductory physics for many students who will never take another physics course. And so what we really want them to get out of the end of this course, one of the main goals is this problem solving and critical thinking skills that they get from being able to think a little bit like a physicist. And so we can be even more explicit that this is one of our goals, and this is actually going to help you in interacting with ChatGPT in a better way, rather than ChatGPT being able to just do your work for you. In terms of what we're going to change in our class, so our class is already using active learning in class. It's already sort of a flipped classroom model. A lot of the stuff we do in class is already sort of the group problems and the sense making. So we don't actually envision making a ton of changes to our overall structure of the course. But this is where your input, I think, would be very valuable. So right now for 802, which is the E&M class, the thinking that I have is that we're going to do something kind of like Kevin demonstrated earlier in the interactive demo, where we'll ask a question to ChatGPT and ask the class to just discuss at their tables, what do you think of this response? Is this a valid response? Is it missing something? What follow-up question should we ask it? So I think that's sort of what we're leaning towards right now for 802. I know Peter Damashkin's in the audience, and I think he can tell you more about the plans for 801, which is the intro mechanics class. But I know, you heard earlier from Rumen's talk that there is sort of this potential new tool that they may have even available this semester. And I know Peter has also mentioned that maybe in groups before a test, they might ask ChatGPT, if somebody happens to have it, to do sort of a synthesis of the content and then discuss that, or use it to generate their own problems. So have the students use it to generate their own problems that they can practice with. But again, the landscape here is changing so quickly. We still haven't really decided what we're going to do. And especially, I saw that there was a student in the audience earlier. So this is where it would be very helpful to have sort of the input of what we're missing here. So I'm not going to take time for, I don't think we have time for questions or discussion, but I do have a series of discussion questions for you. And I have them also in this Google Doc here, and I can put it in the chat too. And we will read anything you write. There's at the bottom of this, there's just sort of an other comments or questions section. Please put your thoughts in this Google Doc for us to think about, for us to help organize what our response is going to be this fall. All right, and thank you for your time.